Transitioning from solving inequalities to now going to linear inequalities, we're wrapping up our Module 1 released items from the 2024 Algebra I Keystone with 2 linear inequality multiple choice problems. This first one is us just interpreting the graph that we have, making sure we understand. Recap from a little bit earlier in another multiple choice that whenever we have an ordered pair, X represents that first value and Y represents that second value. So this one, not much solving here, not much to interpret, just, or not much to do, rather we are just interpreting. So it says, Keisha began a new job and decided to save some money. The linear inequality graphed below models the amount of money she plans to save based on her total earnings. Now, a little bit of a review if this is a linear inequality. Because we have a solid line here, it means that that can be included and it's shaded below the line. So this is where we're talking. This is our solution region, okay? So it's asking us which best statement describes the point 65, 5. And throughout the year, so 65 is representing X and 5 is representing Y. And it's a concrete point. So if I go over 65, up 5, that's in my solution region. That's a solid point. I kept stressing all year that we would go to 65, point to the 65, and then go to the x-axis. So that's saying $65 earned. When she has $65 earned, then I say, okay, now go to the y value, 5, and then go to the y-axis. She will have $5 saved. And if you remember that little trick of pointing to the x-coordinate, then pointing to the label of your x-axis, and then pointing to your y-coordinate and pointing to the y-axis label, you will easily be able to interpret this, and this problem should be a piece of cake. When she earns $65, she will be able to save $5. So if you recognize that, you can easily eliminate her earning $5. That's if you mix up the X and Y axis and you call the Y value the X value. But if you forget, they have X right here. So X goes first. You just need to recall that X comes first in your ordered pair, but it is your horizontal axis. So right off the bat, we're down to a 50-50 shot. We have when Keisha earns a total of $65, the amount she saves could be exactly $5. And that's exactly right. That's what this ordered pair is telling us. The reason why it is not D is because we're not interpreting an inequality. We're interpreting a concrete point. We're interpreting 65, 5. We're not interpreting something with a less than or a greater than symbol. So that's why we would not select D. When Keisha earns a total of $65, the amount she saves will be no more than $5. That is, yes, we have less than here, but we are not interpreting something with a less than or equal than sign. We're interpreting an actual ordered pair, so it should not be D. So that's question 11. Sweet and simple if you know how to interpret an ordered pair and recognize X, Y, and how to interpret from a graph, you will be A-okay. Our final multiple choice question from the released items of the 2024 Algebra I Keystone, looking at Module 1, is a system of inequalities. So not only is it a linear inequality, it's 2 of them, and it's being able to select the 2 inequalities that would represent accurately this system and this solution set. So once again, a test-taking tip is that without even having to graph all 4 of these, we should be able to eliminate choices just by interpreting the inequality signs. And really, in this case, even if you don't remember what the inequality signs tell us, you should be able to eliminate some choices because you see a solid line and a dashed line. So hopefully that tells you that something needs to be off on your inequality signs. And in this case, when one is solid and one is dashed, that tells us one has a line underneath the inequality sign and one doesn't have a line. So just a little recap before we use that tip to eliminate some choices. If you have a greater than or less than, strictly greater than, strictly less than, meaning that that cannot be included in your solution, you would use a dashed line. So when there is no line underneath your inequality sign, when you connect your dots of your y equals mx plus b, or y is greater than mx plus b, or y is less than mx plus b, you would use a dashed line when something is strictly greater or strictly less than for a linear inequality. So we see that here. So that tells us that one of our inequalities does not have a line underneath it. And so right off the bat, I can eliminate choice A because both of those inequalities have lines underneath them. So they shouldn't, neither of them would have been dashed in choice A. If you have greater than or equal to, I always say if there's that solid line underneath that inequality sign, right, that tells me connect my dots with a solid line. So that's basically saying that that line is included in your solution. It's saying greater than or equal to mx plus b, less than or equal to mx plus b. And how we communicate that is once we graph our line, we connect the dots with a solid line. So we have that. So that's telling us we have one inequality with no line underneath it and one inequality with a line underneath it. So that allows me to eliminate option D because both of them, those inequalities, don't have lines underneath them. So that would translate to two lines with dashed lines, and we don't have that. We have one solid and we have one dashed, okay? Now, the next thing we need to interpret is we can kind of just, once again, without doing much, not even really looking at the shading above and shading below, we should be able to see these lines. Now, they are the same, right? 0.25x plus 2, 0.25x plus 2. One has a solid line. So if I go to remember y equals mx plus b, we begin at our y-intercept, which is our b value. So we're beginning at 2. And then our slope tells us how we move. So we're going to move 0.25 is up 1, right 4. So that's this dashed line. Now notice it's a dashed line. So I don't even need to care about how I'm shading, because this guy in choice B tells me that that line that I just connected the dots for should be solid. And in choice C, that says it should be a dashed line. And so C is my winner because I see that y 0.25x plus 2 is a dashed line. So it should match with my choice C inequality. And to follow up with that, my bottom inequality says begin at -4, then my slope is -1/2. That has that line underneath it, so that's going to be a solid line. Whereas if I look at choice B, yes, it's the same line, but that has a dashed line. So they're seeing if you can make sense of when it's a dashed line, when it's a solid line. So our option should be C here. Now, just a review on when to shade above and below, because maybe they're not going to trick you on just the signs. Maybe they're going to trick you and say, okay, most people know when to use a solid line or a dashed line, but a lot of people don't know how to shade. So let's just go over our shading. If we have a greater than or equal to, we shade above our line. So if I'm looking at choice C here, we would shade above that line because it is greater than or equal to -0.5x minus 4. And then if you have a less than or equal to, we are going to shade below that line. So looking at that top equation, that says less than 0.25, so that tells me I'm going to shade below. And so we want the overlap region to be shaded in that dark gray, and that's what we have here. So greater than or equal to, you shade above your line. I always put my pencil on the y-intercept and I tell myself, okay, shade above. Less than or equal to, you shade below that y or below that y-intercept. But this problem wasn't really testing our ability for our shading. It was testing our ability to recognize when is a solid line versus when is a dashed line. And your solid line is when you have a line underneath your inequality. Your dashed line is when you do not. And so hopefully you recognize that in choice C, that top equation has a dashed line and it's beginning at 2, and so that matches exactly with what we have in our graph. And that bottom equation has a solid line, and that matches with exactly what we have here beginning at -4. So our answer should be C. All right, that's going to round out our multiple choice for Module 1 from the 2024 released items. Next up, we will be going through the constructed response.